Jews headed many of the smuggling networks that emerged. To the migrants whose lives were saved and families restored, these criminal organizations served a humanitarian purpose. A migrant who followed this route later told his story under the fictitious name Louis Kurland. "We lay in the boat like herring in a barrel," Kurland said. "It was very hot, and the heat from our bodies made it hotter. I am ready to go to hell if I have to. It cannot be any worse than that day in the boat."
We're here in Key West with the author Arlo Haskell. So tell us a little bit about how you evolved as a writer.
I really came up as a poet, and then about 10 years ago I had started to do a little bit of historical research, looking into the kind of literary histories of writers who had spent time in Key West, and learned that I kind of loved getting into archives. In addition to being a writer, historian, I'm the executive director of the Key West Literary Seminar. I get to make sure that literary Key West is not just part of the past. I run a small press, Sandpaper Press, and we publish poetry, a little bit of fiction. I'm sort of always working on one book or another.
Your latest book is called The Jews of Key West: Smugglers, Cigar Makers, and Revolutionaries.
Jews have thrived in this climate since the 1820s. Even where they have been forgotten, or where anonymity was essential to their survival, Jews have shaped the island we know today. Their history is the history of Key West. I'm fascinated by untold histories, and this book is full of that. My first phase of research was kind of trying to fact check family stories like that.
One of the things I found surprising and had no idea about was that Jews were part of the industry of cigars down here.
The cigar industry is one of the more popular components of Key West history, and it's always told as a Cuban story. It's certainly a big Cuban story, but actually, in fact, the cigar industry in Key West was pioneered by Jewish manufacturers, particularly a guy named Samuel Seidenberg, who capitalized on a tariff structure that made it financially advantageous to produce cigars domestically in the United States rather than on the island of Cuba.
So one of the main characters that features in your book is named Louis Fine.
Louis Fine was a Lithuanian Jewish immigrant, and he was a catalyst for the community. He was not an ordained rabbi, but he was the de facto rabbi for the community.
So we're here in the Jewish section of the cemetery at Key West, and this place sort of is one of the beginnings of organized Jewish life down here.
This is the place that brings you the furthest back in time as far as a physical place you can visit.
And in your research, did you see a lot of these names popping up?
Yeah, absolutely. I would sometimes come here to as a research visit. I found that it would help me, thinking about the people I was writing about.
So around the same time as this was established was around when the first synagogue was established, right?
That's right, yeah. The cemetery was established in the 1890s, and then in the first decade of the 1900s, Louis Fine and others purchased a wood frame building and established the first formal synagogue. There's a restaurant there today called Sarah Beth's, and B'nai Zion is the temple that continues in Key West today on United Street.
And that's the one that opened in the late 60s.
Into this thriving, multicultural, multilingual community of Key West in the late 19th century comes a very pivotal figure in Cuban history, José Martí, who was the one to kind of successfully crystallize the decades-long struggle for Cuban independence. Jews like Louis Fine, they lent their support to the cause. He carried this family legacy of his family having been persecuted by the Spanish during the Inquisition. What surprised me is how much that story and others had disappeared even from oral history in Key West.
Where can people find out more about the Jews of Key West?
There's a website, jewsofkeywest.com, and if you're interested in this history and interested in the book, I would say go to your local bookstore or your local library and ask for a copy.